Too Long Didn't Read, brought to you by the Alan Turing Institute, the National Institute for Data Science and AI. Welcome to Too Long Didn't Read, a choice selection of AI and data science morsels. I'm Jonah, a digital content producer here at the Turing.
And I'm Smera, a researcher in data justice and global ethical futures. Another busy month here, Jonah.
I know, Taylor Swift is in the UK.
But I was thinking more in terms of the snap election that's slowly creeping up on us.
Oh yes, yeah, that's important too. So, this week we will talk about the UK's first AI candidate for Parliament, AI Steve.
We see how life begins to mirror art as Scarlett Johansson, star of AI blockbuster Her, sues OpenAI.
And we explore how AI is finally helping us to get all Dr Doolittle and talk to the animals.
So this month marks the 112th anniversary of the birth of Alan Turing, our institute's namesake.
I actually went to Bletchley Park at the weekend with my daughter.
Oh, that's really nice. Was it any good?
It was so good. Yeah, it was really moving, really interesting. And I kind of went with a head full of Turing facts to wow my daughter as we walked around. But you very quickly realise that Alan Turing wasn't sort of the only hero there. There's so many amazing women and men who did incredible work. And at the moment, there's a D-Day exhibition, which literally made me cry. I can recommend it. It's brilliant. So inevitably, it got me thinking about what Turing would think of this AI-tastic world we live in now and how he would feel to learn, as we did this month, that for this coming election, we have the UK's first AI candidate for Parliament. AI Steve.
That's right. AI Steve is a chatbot that is the moniker of Steve Endicott, a Brighton-based businessman running for Parliament as an independent candidate. So Endicott's party, Smarter UK, will record all the conversations that members of the public have with the chatbot. It will then create policy drafts based on people's input. Then these policy drafts will be sent out on a weekly basis to validators or these local volunteers who then score the policies from 1 to 10. Policies meeting that 50% threshold will then be adopted, and those validators will control all of AI Steve's parliamentary votes. Steve Endicott believes he's going to be a conduit, and I think I read somewhere that he is planning on attending parliamentary sessions in person. So no holograms.
Worth noting that the tech behind AI Steve is Neural Voice, an AI voice company of which Endicott is the chair. So AI Steve might be the UK's first AI politician, but not the world's. That honour goes to SAM, Semantic Analysis Machine, which was launched in 2022 by Nick Gerritsen, a New Zealand entrepreneur in partnership with Victoria University in Wellington. The idea behind SAM was to provide data-driven solutions to political issues apparently free from the bias and personal interests that often plague human politicians. Endicott has a similar philosophy for AI Steve, claiming that by removing the human ego, an AI MP can collect more data about what their constituents care about and empower the community to put forward and vote on policies. So the AI isn't making the decisions, it's just collating views and distributing questions. It's like a capitalist socialist mashup. Interesting world we're living in, innit, Smera? Leaves me with lots of questions.
Interesting indeed, Jonah. And I have a couple of questions too. Fortunately, this week we have someone here to help us with those questions. This month's guest is a very close colleague of mine, Dr. Mike Katell.
Hello, good to be here. Thanks for having me on.
So to give our listeners a bit of background, Mike is an ethics fellow in the Turing's Public Policy Program and a visiting senior lecturer at the Digital Environment Research Institute at Queen Mary University of London. He is a philosopher of technology whose research focuses on the social justice and human rights implications of data and digital infrastructures.
Mike is also co-director of the research cooperative, the Critical Platform Studies Group, CritPlat, which is a collection of people and ideas seeking to hold a mirror to the world of technology and platforms, offering a critical and activist lens. So, no better person to talk to about this crazy old thing called AI. Welcome, Mike.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks. Good to be here.
So, Mike, first question, very important. Would you say that AI Steve is a compelling candidate?
Well, I'll just say straight out that AI Steve is a fascinating gimmick, right? AI Steve is undoubtedly going to draw a lot of attention to the real man behind the curtain, Steve Endicott. Is AI Steve compelling as an actual candidate? Not for me, but that could be a generational thing. Maybe future generations will expect all of their candidates to be AI bots. I mean, one of the things though I have to say about AI Steve is that it reflects such a literally technocratic approach to politics. I mean, AI Steve is basically, the whole project is about statistical politics, like gathering enough impressions from some place, adding up the numbers, figuring out how many people like this and how many people don't like that, and then simply translating that into policy. I think we can do a lot better.
Beyond elections, would a similar model, such as a tech interface, work really well to connect with the constituents? Do you think there are any benefits to using this?
Well, I think absolutely there are a lot of benefits to using technologies that exist and have existed to connect constituents with the people that represent them. I mean, I think letter writing was a particularly great technology for connecting with constituents with their policymakers in years gone by. People still use that. Email, actually, I think was a game changer. And so there's no reason why the newest technologies, including AI chatbots, couldn't serve similar roles. The question is how much we come to rely on these new tools and let old methods of communication wither away, right? We've seen how social media, for example, has changed the game in terms of how we all connect with each other. I mean, when's the last time someone sent you a postcard? I mean, maybe it happens periodically, but it's more likely to be sort of ironic or something than actually legitimate. And when's the last time you penned a letter to your dear university friend or whatnot? We don't do that anymore, right?
Pretty often. I don't know about yourself,
What?
Mike, but I do love sending postcards. It's my favorite thing to send my dad because there's very little I can buy him. So I love sending him postcards from the places that I go to and writing cute letters.
You're such a Renaissance woman, Smera. I really admire that. Yeah,
it's vintage, guys. I'm sorry.
Keep it alive. Keep it going. Keep it alive. But really, I mean, social media and the tools that we have, email, messaging, chat, right, WhatsApp, have really changed the game about how we all communicate with each other. And there are some benefits to that, but there are also some drawbacks, right? So I think we need to think about that in terms as we move forward and look carefully in something so important in the way and how we conduct our politics, and thinking about whether or not and to what extent these digital tools are helping make connection or potentially hindering it or altering it in ways that might not be good for society in general in the long term.
With regards to having easier access to your MP, I think I would be more likely to use a chatbot than go to visit my local MP in person. However, I can also see that by making it easier to put your thoughts and questions across, there will inevitably be more unresearched and reactive comments, and potentially people might feel more able to express discriminatory views. Does this influx of sort of possibly skewed data muddy the water for these sorts of AI models?
One thing that we can say for sure is that all of the technological affordances of the digital world increase the volume of communication, increase the amount of information that flows. And there are a lot of positives to that. That means a lot more people have access to avenues of communication that they may not have had before. But the disadvantage is that there's always a cost involved in that. Someone has to dig through all of that, right? So if you're an MP and you have a staff of 10, 20, 30, however large your staff is, depending who you are, and your job is to do a lot of different things, do policy research, keep calendars and diaries up to date and whatnot. And then you suddenly go from processing, I don't know, a few hundred pieces of communication to several thousand, tens of thousands, potentially bot-generated communications. That's a lot to handle. And then what you're going to see is people using digital tools on the other end to process all that incoming information and to distill it down. It becomes a bit of an arms race, really, right? Where, like, on the one hand, you provide ways to bring in a fire hose of information, and now you need basically a supersized, I don't know, catcher's mitt to handle the influx of information on the other end.
Less is more is a thing of the past these days, isn't it? It's more is more now. It's more.
Yeah. The amazing thing about digital communication is the ease of it. The unamazing thing about it is the overabundance of it. I mean, we are all struggling. We all struggle with our email inboxes as it is. And now each of us has, 4 or 5 messaging apps on our phones that we're carrying with us all the time that are pinging and buzzing us. It's great to be in touch with everyone, but it's also a lot of work. It's both a blessing and a burden.
So I tried AI Steve out. It was quite impressive, long-winded, but impressive. It's really different to chatbots like ChatGPT because it clearly has a motive. It's always pointing me to how Smarter UK will do things, telling me it will somehow prioritize every one of my concerns, and even asking me for my ideas and saying it will keep them in mind. So am I being fooled by iteration 1 of AI Steve? What's to come? Is it just another chatbot? And most importantly, where's the data it's using to chat to me about policy coming from? And how can we possibly hope that the answers aren't biased?
If I were an MP looking at AI Steve as a template for the future, I'd be fascinated and possibly terrified, right? Fascinated because, okay, this is a really interesting thing to automate some of the interaction I have with my constituents. But can you just imagine, I mean, as it is now, you think about the challenges of being a politician and always having to be sure you say the right thing at the right time. You know, it's a minefield. It's probably one of the sharpest skills that politicians have to hone is getting their messaging right and being consistent. And particularly in the era now in which like we have instant response to anything anyone says available, 24/7. Looking at AI Steve, let's think about AI Steve 2.0 or 3.0. A very carefully trained AI Steve will require hundreds of hours, probably maybe thousands of hours of work to make sure that what it uttered was acceptable to the real Steve or the real politicians behind AI Steve. But even with the greatest attention and the most work, there's still going to be major problems. I mean, think of ChatGPT as a great example, right? ChatGPT, billions of dollars of investment have gone into making ChatGPT more than anything, not a Nazi. Right. This was the top level goal for ChatGPT. Make it not a Nazi. Right.
The bare minimum.
At the bare minimum, right? If you can get that right, you might be able to dominate the chatbot market. And look at that. They've done it, right? They've made not a Nazi. They could have called it that, actually. For listeners who remember Microsoft Hey, which was one of the first publicly released chatbots that was able to interact with the public, it had that problem in which, with all best intentions, Microsoft put this chatbot into the world and had it interact with people, and it was learning from what people were feeding into it. It was learning from things it was finding on places like, I don't know, Twitter or something. And before long, it was spouting racist, misogynistic, pretty hate-filled stuff because that's what it thought was going on in the world. And it turns out that is what's going on in the world. The internet is full of human beings, including humans at their worst, saying the most terrible things. Okay, bringing it back to the present, to the question of AI Steve. So, okay, AI Steve is not going to be built entirely from scratch. You're going to use things that already exist. In order to train these chatbots, you have to access the information that is there, right? The entire English language Wikipedia is foundational to ChatGPT, for example. Looking around on the internet for whatever data is there in enormous quantities that would be next to impossible for a human to carefully curate to determine what's the good stuff and what's the bad stuff. This is the kinds of volumes that are needed to train these chatbots. And already what we're seeing, what researchers have already discovered, is that the training sets contain a lot of terrible stuff. They contain racist comments. They contain outdated ideas about gender and the role of women in society. And most troubling, they contain loads and loads of conspiracy theory information because the internet is full of very legitimate looking news sources, with air quotes, I'm gesturing here, and videos of people spouting all sorts of crazy nonsense. One telling example of this is that researchers found the widely held conspiracy theory that Barack Obama was not born in the United States and was therefore not eligible to be president. When queried, a number of chatbots that were accessing just whatever data they found gave a variety of answers to the question, was Barack Obama eligible to be US president, or was Barack Obama born in the United States? Because there was so much coverage about the possibility that he wasn't, even though the facts show very clearly that he was, right? And so these are the kind of risks that an AI Steve would always come up against.
What happens when something goes wrong? Is there any liability? Do you think with the current state of governance in the UK, we can hold someone liable for it?
This is a good question. It's particularly important in politics, where there are some fairly strict parliamentary rules about how close you have to stick to the facts, right? In other political systems, a certain amount of, shall we say, creative rhetoric is permitted in the public forum, but routinely politicians are getting in trouble for going on, say, radio or other interview programs and so on, and saying things that turn out to be factually untrue. So there's already a certain amount of regulation that applies to political discourse in the UK that would have to apply to any use of AI in political matters. The reality of liability, though, for AI is that we don't really have a very good schema for that yet. Most of the companies that build the big AI models, including ones that might be under the hood of a future AI Steve, are based in the United States. So they're not exactly beyond the reach of UK law, but it's much harder to apply UK law to technologies that originate outside of the UK. Now, I understand that AI Steve is built from technologies that come from Steve Endicott's actual business. So I can't say for sure where the underlying models come from. But I can say that right now, at this very moment, we don't yet have a good liability scheme for AI companies to take responsibility for what their technologies do. There is an interesting case that I'll point to that maybe is a template for the future, or not the future. It lays bare some of the issues that we have to come to grips with about liability and who bears responsibility for what AI does and now says. I point to the case of Air Canada that put a chatbot on their customer service portal to interact with customers and answer their questions about all things Air Canada. Some customers asked the Air Canada chatbot a variety of questions about fares and things like bereavement policies and how to get discounts and how to get refunds and that kind of thing. And the chatbot gave them absolutely incorrect information, costing Air Canada customers hundreds, if not thousands of dollars in costs that they weren't anticipating. When the customers complained, Air Canada claimed, oh, well, the correct information was available elsewhere on our website, and you shouldn't have just believed what our chatbot told you. Fortunately, or somewhat fortunately for consumers, a judge found that this was actually nonsense and that Air Canada had to take responsibility because it was an Air Canada resource that people went to, and consumers had every reason to believe that what the Air Canada chatbot was telling them was true. However, to complexify this question a little bit, one has to wonder how much responsibility they actually have if they did not themselves build the chatbot. What promises or assurances were made to them by the company that built the chatbot that then they used in good faith, thinking that it would serve their needs, and then got them in terrible trouble with consumers? That remains an open question. We haven't settled the question of where the responsibility really lies. Somewhere in there is kind of a buyer beware kind of perspective, but which buyer?
So I wonder if having this system of creators and validators, getting the public to do the sifting, is a good way to sidestep liability issues. In regards to the validators, people who are going to vote on policy drafts that AI Steve sends them weekly, is there a risk that the validators won't be a fair representation of the community? Will they be able to understand the nuance of varying topics? For example, in its first couple of weeks, the top 3 conversations people are having with AI Steve are wide in breadth: local bin collection, cycle lanes, and the conflict in Gaza. Can a one-size-fits-all computer model really be effective when it comes to such broad political topics?
The question of representation here is key, and it's a question that can be asked on many levels. First of all, if the real Steve Endicott is relying on AI Steve to do all of the collection of issues and concerns for his potential constituents, exclusive of any other means of gathering that information, then we're already going to see a problem of representation, because the only people who are going to participate are people who are comfortable using this kind of interface. And that's not everyone, right? A lot of people have no interest in interacting with some avatar version of their political representative, or they lack technical skills or technical interest or language skills and so on. So you're already going to see a certain self-selection going on in simply interacting with AI Steve in the first place, right? So that's one problem with representation. And yeah, having validators is all very, very well and good. But yes, it does also raise the question of who are these validators? What are their motivations for being involved? It's an interesting model that might be worth experimenting with and developing. But as it's being proposed right now, it's pretty blunt, and I think it leaves important issues out of view that are particularly important, especially important when we're talking about political processes and political communication.
So, do you think these kind of interfaces will negatively impact public trust? Do you think there's like an erosion of the trust that general public would have in their constituents because they're using these interfaces, or because of the feedback or outputs you're receiving from different forms of AI, Steve?
Let's start with that understanding that this is a gimmick. It's a marketing ploy to get people excited. And it is. There's a lot of conversation happening. It's getting coverage all over the place. And I'm willing to bet Steve Endicott gets a few more votes as a result simply by employing this tactic. The question of whether or not this improves the political spectrum, whether or not this increases or decreases trust in politics, I think is a very serious question. I don't have a clear fortune teller answer to that, but I can give you my intuition, which is that one of the reasons that distrust in politics has grown or is growing is that people feel alienated from politics. They feel like the politicians that they see representing them are not actually representing them, that they're representing something else. And more to the point, their politicians seem distant and far away. People who don't live in London, for example, see a great deal of attention being paid to issues and things happening in London. Parliament seems miles away from their day-to-day concerns. Now you create a bot or an avatar in place of a real human member of Parliament, and you place that in the way between you and connecting to the day-to-day realities of Parliament and the national legislature and politics. I don't think that's going to increase people's sense of connection to the political process that has such a huge impact on their lives. In fact, there's a real risk of increasing that alienation by creating a barrier and increasing the sense of unreality of politics.
So maybe the rise of AI Steve and Sam and other AI models is inevitable, but I want to push back on one part of their reasoning about removing the human ego from politics. I agree that we don't want politicians who only think about their careers, but I think the concept of having a human who can relate to people, understand masses of information, delegate, manage, and action huge tasks is a really important idea. And that's what, in principle, MPs and ministers do. And sometimes, not always, it's self-belief or ego that drives people. So I'm thinking of politicians with my optimism hat on here. With this in mind, do you think we could actually come full circle and realise we need people in the mix more and more?
There's a saying that goes something like, at the end of the day, all politics is personal. The human contact, like interacting with the real person, is an essential part of building trust in politicians and political processes. It may be impossible to fully trust politicians. Power is corrupting. Politics is messy. We all know the stories. We all know the tales. But a great deal of trust is created by physical interaction with politicians. So I don't think a transition to turning politicians into avatars or using chatbots in place of real interaction is going to increase or improve trust in politics. I think we're at risk of actually going much in the other direction.
So thanks very much, Mike. That's been a fascinating chat with you. If Mike Katell was our head of state, what would be the first policy you would push through?
Okay, let's see. Would this be before or after I submitted my resignation? Because let me tell you, that is not a job that I in any way want, even in my deepest, darkest fantasies. But what would be my first policy to push through? I think the first thing I would consider very seriously is the vast inequality of wealth in our country and also around the world. Any policies that we can do to improve that would both improve people's lives, but also, I think, reduce divisiveness and conflict, which a great deal of which I think comes from the tremendous gulf in income and wealth and power. Now, as an AI ethicist, I would focus that lens also quite strongly on the AI industry, which is itself a vast concentration of power with huge gulfs between the most powerful players and everyone else. I think doing work to reduce that inequality, to create more equity in society would be of positive benefit all around.
Great. I think by the end of this series, Smera, we're going to have like a solid cabinet of people.
Well, thank you so much, Mike, for joining us. It's always nice to see you in a setting that's not a weekly meeting over another paper that we're writing.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. This was a lot of fun, and I look forward to hearing more TLDR.
Glastonbury is nearly upon us, Smera. Are you excited? You're not going, are you?
I am.
Are you?
I actually am. Do you want to see
that.
my ticket? Do you want to see my ticket? I'm so excited.
That makes me so jealous. Oh, that's so cool. Even the ticket's cool. Oh, you're going to have a brilliant time.
But more importantly, it brings us to our second story. Do you want to have a guess?
Well, I know that last year David Hockney premiered an AI moving image piece of art. This year, maybe there's an AI musician performing? It's not AI Steve, is it?
I see. As far as I know, he's not on the lineup, but I'm open to being a bit surprised. I think festivals in summer are a great reminder of recent declines in the music industry, and more specifically, the lack of protections for artists against generative AI.
Yes, that story continues. So what is it this time?
So in the past few weeks or even months, OpenAI has been facing a lot of scrutiny with their generative AI models because they train on data without the permission of artists. This time, they're being sued by Scarlett Johansson.
The same Scarlett Johansson who voiced the AI in the movie Her.
Yep, it's a full circle moment.
Yeah, life imitating art, which was in turn imitating life, which is, it turns out, starting to imitate art, which is, yeah. So Scarlett is suing them because she thinks the new voice sounds like her.
To give a bit of background for our listeners, OpenAI had first approached Scarlett Johansson to be one of the voices behind the voice assistant named Sky, part of a ChatGPT update. She did decline initially when requested by OpenAI, but when Sky was formally released, she heard the voice and found it eerily similar and has since taken legal action against the tech firm.
Okay, so it isn't her voice, is it? I read they used a different voice actor for this, and they were no way related to her. But it must be weird for her to hear what she thinks is her voice, and it's not your voice.
I mean, I kind of feel it too sometimes, especially when I hear this podcast before it goes out.
What, you think that this isn't your voice?
No, it's more like, is this what I really sound like?
Oh, yeah, I know what you mean. To me, every time I hear my voice, I picture a bouncy ball going down a set of stairs. To me, I sound like...
Oh my God, that's so cute.
It's kind of
That's
annoying.
actually really cute.
So this isn't the first time we have had a case of stolen identity. I read about a few cases pre-generative AI even, where individuals have sued big companies like Ford and Frito-Lay, the crisp people, for using their voices. We even touched on this on a previous episode around the time Drake and The Weeknd had their voices cloned. Do you think that this case is particularly special?
Yeah, cases like this can actually set a precedent in law, but there are a few things to consider here. First, this is yet another case brought to US courts regarding OpenAI's use of someone's copyright content. Second, it raises the question of current regulations and applicability of current laws, which is interesting because a lot of courts and legal scholars believe that existing laws and our rights and freedoms are enough to protect us in the case of any adverse impact, such as someone, cloning your voice. In Scarlett's case, the relevant law would be the right to publicity. But getting back to setting precedents, for instance, there was this one case back in Feb where the courts dismissed a copyright lawsuit brought forward by comedians who claimed that their books were used to train ChatGPT. While the claim was dismissed, maintaining that ChatGPT didn't infringe on their copyrights or unjustly profit from their work, there is an outstanding concern of data scraping at scale.
Based on ChatGPT's sense of humour, I would not be claiming any ownership of it. So these models that scrape the entirety of the internet, surely, whether we like it or not, everybody that has ever put anything on the internet, any social media, anything, should or could expect themselves to be reflected in the data set that ChatGPT and other models are using. So should we all be concerned? Why is it only celebrities that are concerned? I know it's part of how they make their money, is who they are. But yeah, it's a problem, or is it a problem for everybody? It involves everybody.
It does definitely involve everybody. I think when it comes to everyone's rights, a lot of this data is protected by GDPR because we did only consent to it being used in certain ways. So there are some of those worries that are coming up. But again, those are concerns that the EU is currently confronting, but a lot of countries around the world aren't really looking into that aspect at this moment because they don't have those laws.
Yeah, right.
The difference, I'd say, with celebrities is they've copyrighted a lot of their content, which does mean there's different applicability. There's worries about royalties. See, I don't expect a lot of royalties coming out of someone using my images from Hinge or my old Facebook like profiles. Honestly, if you could make money off that, congratulations, you did something great.
And I suppose there's an argument that says we need people setting the precedent for legal battles that could in then later time represent all of us.
Essentially, yeah. So case laws informing future disputes that might arise, especially if this tech gets even more complicated over time.
Cool.
So coming back to this case, there are a few people I saw in some articles who claim that this whole case is just done for publicity. Either way, this case has brought more attention to these issues. First, Scarlett Johansson has been called to testify before the US Senate, which is huge because they're asking for her own perspectives on how this case has affected her, amongst other things. First, legally speaking, or policy-wise speaking, this brings a lot of attention to what's happening in the US and how they are going to protect individuals, particularly those with copyright content or even their own voice, for instance, being used without them providing permission for it. In this case, Scarlett Johansson has been called to testify before the US Senate about their own experiences with this issue. And there's also an ongoing bill called No Fakes, Nurture Originals, Foster Art, and Keep Entertainment Safe. The No Fakes Act. It's a bipartisan.
It's an acronym. Nice.
Yeah.
Wow.
It is a really cool one. I feel like they've done a great job at naming this. Maybe even greater if they do send it through with necessary amendments, because this bill would protect artists, actors, authors alike from any kind of copyright infringement and ensuring that we can, as the bill states, foster art. The second issue, I think it also brings attention to the overwhelming use of effeminate voices for AI assistant.
Yeah, definitely. So how are artists sort of protecting themselves at the moment?
If you recall, with last year's strikes, the SAG-AFTRA union in the US, which tried to protect the writers in Hollywood, some of their points of negotiation involved not using generative AI to replace their work or using their work to train generative AI models. So it is something that people on ground in unions are definitely looking into as well. And considering their strike has stopped, there could be positive progress on this.
Yeah. A Washington Post article I read explains how female voices are seen as far more human than males, and so are often more successful for spreading misinformation. It also points out the gender gap in technology, so most of the people designing the bots are men.
Side note, I do wonder if they think it feels more human and if this has something to do with how we see a lot of women as motherly figures. And we have that association that,
she mentions in the researcher in the Washington Post article mentions that we not only think of female as more nurturing and more trustworthy, but we name more inanimate objects female, like ships are females because they keep you safe,
But this isn't a recent trend, though. While researching this issue, I came across articles that highlighted how female or effeminate voices were integral to voice warning systems on fighter jets. Some pilots referred to the voice as Bitchin' Betty. Please, censor me. In the UK, it was actually called Nagging Nora.
Oh, no.
And there was also an aspect of sexualization as well, because some called the voice systems in certain fighter jets Sexy Sally. But some studies suggest that this is because the higher pitch of more effeminate voices can actually grab the pilot's attention. So even on commercial airlines now, we have something called the TCAS, or the Traffic Collision Avoidance System. But the TCAS system also uses an effeminate voice. So when the nose tips down too much, or if there's issues with the altitude and the plane has to warn the pilots that they have to pull up, go down, move to the right, left, it does so in an effeminate voice because apparently that grabs attention.
The Washington Post article I read also quotes Sylvie Boreau, who was a marketing professor and online researcher in Toulouse, saying that when researchers choose to make a chatbot female because it will perform better, are they in turn encouraging sexist views about real life women? She said it's a vicious cycle and that humanizing AI might dehumanize women.
I would not be surprised because I'm just so worried that in the future we're going to have more rights for robots than we did for women whose voices were probably used to train those. That's just me spiraling about everything as usual. But before we end, I do also want to add a fun fact closer to home about the London Underground. So a lot of transport workers refer to the voice on trains and platforms as Sonia because it gets on your nerves.
Is that true?
It's true.
That's really good. That's really good. I like that. Our ability to understand is limited by our ability to perceive, and AI throws open the aperture of that which we can perceive. What do you think of that, Smera?
That's amazing.
It's good, isn't it?
That's really good.
It's not really mine, of course. So that was said by Asa Raskin, co-founder of the Earth Species Project, which is a non-profit dedicated to using artificial intelligence to decode non-human communication.
Ooh.
So this month, Wisdom 2.0 Festival released an amazing talk Asa gave at this year's event. He explains how understanding the species we share this planet with could help us save ourselves and live more harmoniously with our cohabitants. He pointed out that where our imagination has failed to find solutions for many of humanity's big problems, if we were able to understand a species that has been passing down language, culture, knowledge from generation to generation for far longer than humans, something like 36 million years, such as whales and dolphins, we might stand a better chance of gaining that deeper wisdom.
That is really cool. You usually see a lot of tech firms imitating nature, be it,
Yes.
and tech doesn't necessarily have to mean AI, but a lot of the bullet trains that we have are modeled along the physical features of a lot of birds.
Yeah, biomimicry. It's awesome. Ironically, the bullet train, if it was like inspired by like a peregrine falcon diving, for example, have you ever seen a photo of the front of a bullet train when it's like stopped? It's just like blood splattered from all the animals. It's annihilated on the way. Dark. Anyway, so the reason I was watching this video, which I'll put in the show notes as well, it's a really inspiring video, is because this month the news kept throwing us animal communication stories. First, Jessie, the third wheel of the TLDR tricycle, sent me an article from the BBC about researchers decoding dogs' barks using AI, and then a paper was published in Nature about how researchers have discovered that elephants call each other individual specific names. Smera, before we get into the why, can you tell me a little bit about the how? What are the AI models researchers use for this sort of thing? Is that done using large language models like the chatbots we're familiar with?
Well, I would like to point out it's not the similar kind of large language models that we use for ChatGPT or the like, but this is a separate one because I guess it's training in a completely different language of a different species entirely. So how this works is the scientists have basically brought together these massive data sets of different vocalizations of dogs, of different breeds, of different sex, of different ages, to train the AI to analyze the different tones. And this is all compiled using a model Wave2 Vec2 or Vav2 Vec2. I've actually never said it out loud, but they've used one of these models to analyze it. And what such models and similar models like this tend to do is classify all of these sounds. So they've already trained on this data to identify different bits of sound, and then they will use this data through random forest models, which you had mentioned earlier. And these random forest models are basically models that can help classify this information.
Okay, right. So lots of data, in this case barks or elephant noises, then an AI model splits it all up to classify them. It's a filing system. And what's the random forest model?
Now, the best way I can explain a random forest model is to bring it down to the simplest part of it, which is a decision tree. Many decision trees make a random forest. So a decision tree, which I'm sure many listeners and you yourself would have come across in maybe those old teen magazines where they're like, if you're, based on the different answers that you give, you're going to get your celebrity crush.
Yeah, always Hugh Jackman.
So imagine that, but with dog noises and elephant sounds and whatnot. So that creates one of the decision trees. A random forest is a series of these decision trees that are brought together, and the model tends to find the best optimum solution within the class of these decision trees for the final answer.
Okay. A filing system and a load of decision trees. That's the forest bit. Right, I like that. Interesting, thank you. So the researchers studying the elephants calling each other by names, they used recordings from 1986 to 2022 of African elephants in Kenya. So a lot of grumbles and rumbles. And they found that many elephants use specific vocalizations to communicate with specific elephants. Names, for lack of a better word, weren't always used, but when they were, it was over large distances and often from older elephants calling to young, which sort of fits the names idea.
I really want to know if there was one elephant out there calling out to their little one as Dumbo, but yeah.
Maybe. It's quite sweet. The researchers describe how when they played an elephant its name, it got energetic and moved towards the sound. But when they played another elephant's name to it, it was like, yeah, they're not talking to me and weren't interested.
Oh, that's so cute.
The senior study author, George Whittemire, said the evidence provided here that elephants use non-imitative sounds to label others indicates that they have the ability for abstract thought. I like that. He goes on to say, being able to communicate with elephants could be a game changer for their protection in the wild. He says that it's tough to live with elephants when you're trying to share a landscape and they're eating crops. He would like to be able to warn them, don't eat people's crops or they might hurt you.
Okay, I'm sorry. On the elephant side here for a second, why are we growing crops in what should be their habitats? I think we should be warning humans with whom we can actually communicate rather than warning elephants.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Maybe we should
No offense to the co-authors.
Okay, I can see how understanding elephants' communications could be useful for their protection. But returning to this dog debacle, I could be wrong here, but don't we kind of know what our dog, or cat for that matter, want from us? Isn't it going to be something like, give me food, need the bog, want a cuddle? I'm sure we could read into it more, and I'm sure many people do. But my question to you, Smera, is should we? And why?
Yeah.
You know, aside from it being interesting, and maybe we can find out a bit more specifically what our pets need or what animals in general need, is this important research? You know, when you consider the energy that AI models use and the researcher time, does this have an actual bigger purpose? Is it sort of about getting studies done on animals we can easily collect data on, like pets, learn the processes and then take it to species that might provide more real world affecting information? You know, is this relevant? Is it important?
Personally speaking, if you get the research funding, go ahead and do that research, all right? It's a wild world out there. But I like to think that when it comes to research, some of the studies that don't seem like they're going to impact real world circumstances are actually aspects we should be taking seriously. For instance, there are a lot of people out there who believe we shouldn't be funding space research because what's the point? We have so many more issues on planet Earth right now. But had we not funded space research, that technology wouldn't have trickled down to, like GPS technology would not have trickled down. Our understanding of how different aspects of our interaction with celestial bodies, you know, how that impacts like our own weather systems on our planet wouldn't make a difference. So I do think that there is scope for it. Exactly how an elephant grumbling or rumbling is going to impact policy, I don't know right now, but I'm always on the side of learning more. And if it does lead to something great, that's amazing.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. I think I'd agree with it. And when I was sort of researching all this, I learnt about things like researchers who are proposing to make a sperm whale phonetic alphabet akin to our own international phonetic alphabet, about obviously dolphins and parrots. There's been a lot of study into their communications. Even something for rodent communications was developed in 2018, a machine learning tool called Deep Squeak. So I'm thinking optimistically, all of this research, which you could question, similar to, like you say, the space research, it could very well have much broader impacts on society. So
I just thought of another reason why this could be important. In the elephant example, the researchers said they'll use their calls to speak to the elephants. But instead, what if we could learn from them? We already know that a lot of animals can hear tremors under the Earth's surface before humans can. They also can sense when tsunamis are coming and so forth. So maybe if we can understand at the very least what noises they make when there's danger in the air.
Yeah.
That could be our own natural early warning systems.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I think that's really interesting. And also, that you could also say that this is why we need to preserve indigenous knowledge, like sort of people who rely on the natural world will understand, bird calls and signs much better than we do. But it also, what you just said made me think about, how some animals can sort of sniff illnesses in humans.
Yeah.
So you could have you could have this cat come up to you and just like look mournfully into your eyes and be like, 2 days. So Asa Raskin, who I mentioned earlier in his awe-inspiring talk, you've got to watch it, he says that everything that can be translated will be translated thanks to AI. So non-human species communication is on the cards. Here's one the ethicist in you will love, Smera. Animal species are being studied and exploited, maybe for their own good, maybe for humans. But if we can one day communicate with them, will the first thing they say be, we didn't give you consent to use our data?
Probably, yeah. I think if we could communicate with them, I think they'd flip us off in whatever, language they have. They'd be like, God damn it, you finally figured out a way to talk to us. The list of problems I have with you.
Yeah. Let me begin. No, actually, no. Sorry, we can't understand you. Oh, it's all got a bit fuzzy.
You think you've been studying me? Girl, do you know how long I've been studying you?
It's a weird idea that one day we could understand so much more about what other animals feel and want. We would no doubt hear many new insulting words in new languages that translate to noisy, two-legged chaos bringer or human.
So, Jonah, do we have any positive news for this month? Things to look forward to?
Yeah,
be proud of.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the last thing we spoke about, animal communication, is on the whole positive. But considering that we might one day be chatting away with our animal pals, an article I read from the BBC this month seems timely. If animals could talk to us, I imagine one of their top points to discuss would be animal testing. So AI is thankfully helping scientists who would usually test toxicity of drugs on animals before being used on humans. Basically, AI can help in two ways. Decades of data sets from prior research can now be trawled through to get the most out of it instead of going straight to test on living creatures. And also AI has sped up the development in software that can do preliminary toxicity tests on drugs, again, negating the need to go straight for the needle. With projects from the US Food and Drug Administration and UK's National Centre for the Replacement, Refinement and Reduction of Animals in Research, there's a lot of progress. Animal testing won't cease overnight, but Emma Grange from the Regulatory Affairs Pressure Group, Cruelty Free International, says, "We hope that ultimately AI can play a part in a transition away from using animals in any test or experiment."
I absolutely love that. I am so happy. That brings me a lot of joy.
This is all based on the articles that I've read, Smera, and I feel optimistic about it, but I know that science doesn't always move at the speed of what you might hope it to. So do you think this kind of thing is on the horizon sooner rather than later?
I think it is. We've seen it. When you were telling me the story, the first thing that came to my mind was digital twins, series of research that's actually being conducted with the Turing as well, where they essentially create a digital twin of the human heart. And if they were able to do that and test effectively, imagine if we have a digital twin of, I guess the human body. You wouldn't even need a digital twin of an animal to do that. But I can see how years of that data can help actualize this future that we're looking at. I think it's something that we can look forward to more. Yeah. It's definitely on the horizon.
Yeah, we saw at AI UK the digital twins, the cardiac had a demonstration stand, and I think we will, during this season, talk to them because it's fascinating research. So anyway, we're all feeling optimistic and positive about AI, science, the world we live in. Oh, the sun's come out. That's all we have time for this month. Thanks again to our guest, Mike Katell. Thank you, Smera. Thank you, Jesse, in the background, for steering us through the recording with nods, laughs, shakes of heads and eye rolls. Thanks also to Alice, who's been doing a great job at spreading the TLDR love, and to Sam, who has to sit through my edits to check that we're not saying anything too horrendous. And of course, thank you for listening. Like, subscribe, follow, and all those kinds of things, and we'll see you next month. Bye!